Hey friends, Rob with you. So this is a response, rebuttal, if you will, to Aron's Phylogeny on his YouTube channel. So I already commented on Aron's channel, but just for the sake of simplicity, I thought I'd make a reaction video rather than lines of argument in written form. And there's nothing wrong with that, but this is just, yeah, it's simple. So first again, so the Phylogeny is talking about lines of descent in the evolutionary chain of event, through like common ancestors and what species are linked or common with other species and so on and so forth. So of course the first it's always a category error with Darwinists, and that's the category error that they're always having to make is that they assume that commonalities equal common ancestry, but that's begging the question. That's reading the conclusion from the premise, reading the premise from the conclusion, and it's, of course, you guessed it, circular reasoning. Because they have commonalities, they must have common ancestor. Because they have a common ancestor, they must have commonalities. It's one big circle, friends. And guess what? It does not work logically. Okay, but let's flesh this out further. Okay, apparently there's over 95%. I think it's almost as high as 98% in some cases. Similarities genetically between chimpanzees and humans. Now, of course, to steal my argument, someone's going to say, Rob, there's no way in hell that chimps and humans have 98% commonality in our genetic structure, and that cannot be that can't be a coincidence. And you're right. But hold on, hear me out. You're right. It's not a mistake, and it's not a coincidence. That's the word I'm looking for. So it's not a coincidence that humans and chimps have 98% or something like that commonality between our DNA. So you could say, okay, if I concede that chimps and humans have extremely high percent, almost perfectly, but not quite. Obviously, there were vast differences between humans and chimps as well, and that's rather obvious to any thinking person. But the commonalities are obviously abundantly, strikingly clear, and you can see that in the bone. They're the way that a chimp looks. If you put me beside a chimp, you will see that, well, anybody for that matter, doesn't matter who it is, but that you would see facial structures, cheekbones, eye sockets, hands, feet. So obviously you're going to see obviously striking similarities between a chimpanzee and a human in terms of our genetic makeup, which of course is going to affect the way we appear. So, and there's no one in their right mind can dispute that. Now, but still, the false equivocation that the Darwinist has already made from the beginning, as I've already said, but I'm willing to repeat it, is reading the data, reading the conclusion into the data, reading the data into the conclusion. And by that I mean they're making the false equivocation that because we have an extremely high percentile of commonalities in our genetic structure between chimps and humans, therefore we must have a common ancestor. And I'm telling you on the face of it, that's false. It's a false equivocation. It's begging the question, and you guessed it again, it's circular reasoning. And you say, okay, fair enough. But now the question, of course, that's going to be fired my way is, Rob, if chimps and humans have such a high percentage of commonalities in our genetic makeup, and they don't have a common ancestor, what conclusion could you bring to the table of discussion, if you will, that would actually bring light to the situation that we don't have a common ancestor, yet we share a striking resemblance of the genetic structure and code with chimps? What's the answer? Now you say, of course, the Darwinists will say, has to be common ancestry. No, I say BS. I say common designer. See, when God made the world, according to Genesis, he didn't think it fit to, there's an expression we use in English which is called reinvent the wheel. That means you don't have to make something new with what you have works. So God didn't think necessary to make chimps and humans strikingly different in our genetic structure when the genetic code was already there. So God didn't reinvent the wheel when he made chimps and humans and monkeys and apes and all other different vast and various species and organisms and structures and animals and so on and so forth. He didn't see fit to reinvent the wheel every time he made a new species. Now, that being said, we can't account for the fact that actually Genesis backs up what we see and observe today. See, there's a verse in, I don't have it, actually, I know it's in Genesis 11, I just don't know the verse, but I have my Bible right here, so I'll open it up. So Genesis 11 is where I'm thinking. Alright. At least I thought it was. I could be wrong. Alright, maybe it's even further. I say that inferred by further means closer to the beginning. Maybe Genesis 1 or 2. Oh, here it is. Genesis 1. So I'm going to read Genesis 1, 20 to 23. Then God said, "Let the waters abound with abundance of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the face of the firmament of the heavens." So God created sea creatures and every living thing that moves, which the waters abounded according to their kind, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good, and God blessed them, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters and the seas, and let birds multiply on the earth." So the evening and the morning was the fifth day. But there's a word I want you to us to pay attention to in this text, and the word is kind. No, and it's a simple word, but it's still around today. So the Bible is affirming what we see in the world today. Now, remember, so hear this again. Let the waters abound with abundance of living creatures, and let the birds fly above the earth across the face of the firmament of heaven. So God created sea creatures, every living thing that moves, with which the waters abounded according to their kind. Now see, a kind is it's a classification. So, I mean, there's different kinds of dogs, there's different kinds of fishes, there's different kinds of humans, there's different kinds of kangaroos, there's different kinds of cats, there's different kinds of worms, there's different kinds of insects. And so kinds is a category. And so the Bible in the first chapter in Genesis 1 tells us about categories. And what do we see today? Everything still produces what? After its own kind. Genesis was right. Who knew? God knew what he was talking about when he said everything produces after its own kind. Now, for example, you can take a poodle and a golden retriever, and they can mate and reproduce and have a kid. And they're gonna and whatever that dog looks like, and when they crossbreed, it's going to be some combination of the genetic structure between the poodle and the retriever. So the genetic code that's going into that newborn is going to have a combination of poodle DNA and retriever DNA, and it's going to create a dog that bears resemblance to both of those two breeds of dogs. But it's still going to be a dog. So that's the kind part. So everything's producing after its own kind. It's interesting, that Genesis, right off the bat, gets biology right. And it's kind of fascinating, isn't it? The first chapter in the Bible deals with biology. And yet, Darwinists want to dismiss this. Everything produces after its own kind. and everything only ever produces after its own kind. So the contention between the young earth creationist and the macroevolutionist is that the creationist will say everything that we have observed backs up Genesis 1:20 to 23. Everything produces after its own kind, and it never produces anything differently. Now the evolutionist will be to task and say that you could have an aquatic, you could have a land creature eventually over time become aquatic and swim in the sea. But we've never observed that. We've only ever actually observed exactly what we see in Genesis 1:20 to 23, that everything produces after its own kind. That's observable, testable, repeatable. You can take it to the bank. It's always going to work. It's scientifically factual. Okay, so that's the first error that Darwinists make. Excuse me. So the first error that Darwinists make is that one. They confuse commonality with common ancestry, but it's not commonality to common ancestry. It's commonality, common designer. And the Bible just said in very plainly in the first chapter of the book that everything produces after its own kind. So what you make of that is up to you, but you're going to be arguing against logic, reason, and science if you argue against this part of the Bible. That's just a start. Okay, let's continue. So, of course, the next thing they'll have to do is, this is probably going to find this a little bit annoying if you're a Darwinist, but so be it. So Darwinian evolution is basically time plus chance, time plus matter equals magic. So an example, I alluded to this in the comments in Aron Ra's comment section on his YouTube about this the phylogeny challenge, challenge that you're saying millions of years for certain creatures in the world, but you haven't given me any data to support. Why should I take it in the face of it? You tell me that something is millions of years old. How do you know something is millions of years old? How do you know it's even like a fraction of that age? So, again, the circular reasoning, first begging the question, then circular. So, and those two fallacies seem to be married to each other, so whatever. And then, of course, you have the obvious one, with which is that there's genetic limitations within the genome of each species that actually prevent macroevolution from ever occurring. In other words, a human will always ever produce a human, and the genetic limitation within the human species will only allow for human reproduction. And you can take this example of what I just gave you about human reproduction and use that for every species on the planet, and you'll never have a new species. Now, of course, they'll say that I'm misunderstanding. Okay, let's take it a step further. Even if I allow for macroevolution as an event, which I don't, but hypothetically speaking, let's say I allow for it, that means at some point in time, humans should be advancing to a new species of human, or we should be dying off. We should have some sort of superhuman. Chimps should probably be dying off too, because if we've evolved for them and they're still around, then, well, awkward. And no one's ever observed macroevolution, but people say, well, it happens so slowly, we can't observe it. Well, if it happens so slowly, you can't observe it, then it's not scientific, because scientific is that which is what? Observable, testable, repeatable. But no one's observed macroevolution, so it fails on the face of it for being scientific. So those, and Aron did a pretty good job, I gotta admit. He was pretty articulate, and, he sounded reasonable, but when you really start to pick it apart, it's just silliness. I mean, it's clever silliness, but it's still silliness, Aron. Aron, your video is silly, and I just poked holes in it, like that. And now, if you want to respond to me, by all means, but if you're going to rule out God as the reason for why I believe what I believe, then you're going to have to do better than argument from incredulity. And as far as I can tell, that's all you really got so far. Argument, incredulity, and begging the question is your shtick. Aron, if you want to respond to me, let's be adult about it. I gave you reasons, very logically sound ones, by the way, as to why phylogeny is silly. See ya.